Good evening, Canby, and welcome to the Urban Renewal Agency meeting for, I take that back, are we just work session tonight, or this is an open meeting?
It's a work session.
Okay, work session. So I'm going to go ahead and call us to order. Next is unfinished business. So Scott, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair Barwig. Good evening, Urban Renewal Commissioners. This is a follow-up from the last meeting. We brought to you information regarding an opportunity to refinance our remaining Urban Renewal Agency debt and save the agency around $5 million. We presented some different options for you to consider and how that might happen. There were some different options in terms of what we could do with that savings and how that could be done. One of the things I want to make sure it's clear is this is, as you just noted, Chair Barwig, is intended to be just a work session. We're not asking you for any actionable items, but we are seeking your input and your direction so that if you would like to proceed with this, it would give us the direction on how we would proceed, and then we would bring back to you those action items at a future meeting in the hopefully near future if we decide to proceed. So that's just to be clear. So when we were discussing this at the last meeting, you had some questions and you had requested some follow-up information around some of this information. And so what I'd like to do is invite Julie Blums, our finance director, up to the speakers table here to give you some follow-up information on those specific items that you asked about. And then I think also Joe Lindsay will be providing some legal counsel on a piece of this information. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie, and then we'll proceed with conversation.
Thank you, Scott. Good evening, Julie. How are you?
Wonderful. How are you?
Doing well.
Okay, so we're going to see if I can figure out how to do this share your screen thing. Nope, that's not mine.
Want me to take over?
Sure.
I don't think any of us, with the exception of Commissioner Bangs, probably knows how to do a screen share either. So no worries from our end over here. Just whenever you get it figured out, it's fine with us.
Well, I have our tech guy in the back who's working it for me. So, okay. So I'm going to go. This is the same presentation I showed you 2 weeks ago, but I added a couple slides, and I just wanted to kind of go to the summary and start there. There we go. Can you see that? You guys good?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. So the last time we talked about this, one of the options before you was to take out the remaining maximum indebtedness up front to be used for projects if the board chose. And the question was, what projects are left and estimates and staff ability to get them done in what time frame? So Jerry and I sat down and went through what projects were left, and we put together two different scenarios for you of both estimated cost, these are estimates, and timing. So on the left-hand side of this slide, this would be the timing if we did not take out the extra money and we just cash funded additional projects. This was the recommendation from the last work session. And on the right-hand side is the option if we were to take out the cash up front and do those projects within the first 3 years. Staff is still recommending option 2, which is not to take the cash out up front for a couple of reasons. One, if we were to try to do all of this work in the first 3 years, we are going to greatly disturb our downtown area in one fell swoop, because a lot of these projects actually affect the downtown area. And as staff, we felt that the businesses have probably taken a big enough hit with COVID that maybe we didn't want to disrupt access to them quite so quickly after we're starting to come out of this. And then the other issue is just staff ability to manage these projects. Jerry's awesome, but he's one person and he said he can do it, but it's a stretch if we were to try to do all of this in 3 years. So that's why we're still recommending the option 2 of not taking out the cash and just cash funding it as we go along over the next 5 years. So this is a list of different projects. And like I said, they're estimated amounts. There's a couple additional projects we put down on the bottom that we didn't have enough funding to do, but we wanted to make sure you knew they were other options. So if you wanted to take projects in or out, swap things, that kind of thing, there you do have that option. Are there questions on that?
I have a couple questions. Actually, I have a bunch of questions, but part of that's simply my ignorance. Mm-hmm. So number one, I don't really understand exactly what these things are. So it says Northwest 2nd grant to Elm for $650,000. I don't know what that means. Or township from Baker Prairie School to Sequoia. Okay. Secondly, is it true that we don't really have to decide which projects tonight, but rather which funding mechanism? Finally, the $475,000 administrative costs, is that like, are we paying our city staff salaries with urban renewal funds? I'm just curious what that is.
We do not pay salaries directly out of urban renewal. There is a chargeback to the city for administrative duties, for economic development activities, those sorts of items, audits, administrative costs. And that's what that is.
What portion of the total fund is that 475 over the course of the 5 years? It appears to be more than half.
Yeah, it's about 2.5 million, roughly.
I guess I'm really unclear on why it is that the bulk of the urban renewal funds would go to administrative costs. And again, that's probably just my own ignorance.
This is not a new charge. This has been going on since the beginning. This is how we fund and pay for part of Scott's time to administer the district, pay for part of Melissa's time for being the recorder for the district, Jamie's time for doing economic development in the district, and then all of the associated costs that go with that, supplies and audit costs, those kinds of things. So this is a cost that we have had all along. I just wanted to make sure that you saw the total spending for the next 5 years. Does that answer your question?
No, not really. I don't understand. I mean, I've identified 3 city personnel whose combined salaries, I would think, are not $475,000. So I really don't understand what those costs are, but I'm sure other people on the council or the board do.
Is there a possibility of getting those administrative costs broken down by line items? Will that be in our budget, or can we see how that breaks down?
Yeah, I can get that for you.
Perfect. And then Commissioner Banks, the Northwest Second to Grant, those are all paving projects, I believe. Is that correct, Julie? Those are paving projects?
Yes.
Okay.
The two exceptions are community park and Wake Park improvements, but all the rest of them are paving projects.
And Commissioner Banks, you had one other question. Did your other question get answered? I'm sorry.
One question I had regarding that community park thing is I think there's a high priority for a new bathroom facility. It says bathrooms. Would that be new bathrooms, or would that be like the 1950s bathrooms we have down there painted again?
New bathroom, new septic system, a new water main going down there.
It would be new bathrooms, a new septic system, and a new water main down there.
Commissioner Spoon.
Thank you, Chair. Julie, when we get the money from the federal government, all that relief money, if some of it can be used on infrastructure, is there a possibility that we can, I mean, I know that paving these roads is important. We also have a street maintenance fund, and I don't want to not pave them. I want to pave them. But I think that there are other projects important to the Urban Renewal District. Is it possible that later on we can change the funding mechanism if we can use the other funds for infrastructure and maybe do some other things to improve inside the Urban Renewal District? Absolutely.
This was just a list of projects that were left on the plan. But if there are other projects you want to do, we can swap things in and out. This is just more of an illustration of how much we could do from year to year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the footbridge to access Fred Meyers. And if we can fund some of the other projects through infrastructure money and then use URA funds, URD funds for some of the stuff that we probably couldn't use infrastructure money for, that makes sense to me. So just want to make sure that door's open for us down the road.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I'm a big, huge fan of that too. And also we have a serious shortage of bathrooms on that 5-mile stretch. Which is fine for me because there's a lot of trees, but it's not fine for everybody.
I think I'm speechless.
Commissioner Parker.
Well, moving right along here. Mr. Chair, I'm wondering if we could go back to Commissioner Banks' question here. We don't need to authorize the spending plan. We can be working with staff on that over the next couple of years. Could you clarify, as chair, why are we here tonight?
Yeah, so I mean, Scott kind of brought that up. It's continued discussion over the different options of refinancing the debt.
In that case, I'm glad staff did this work. And I think if we do reach agreement on proceeding with option 2, then we can have a work session, maybe even a public hearing to get some community values going on this. But if the function of tonight is to give direction to the staff, my individual direction is to accept staff's recommendation. When I was doing my walk around today, I ran into Kyle Lang, and I tried to explain this to him, and he said, refi, that makes a lot of sense. And when I talked about some of the things that are on this list, he said these are investments that will help the business community. So if our goal tonight is to come up with a recommendation to staff or consensus, mine is to proceed with option 2.
Great. And I believe, excuse me, I believe there were some questions over what options there were to help other people decide whether or not to move forward with option 2. So I think that's what this slide is for, is to give a little more clarity for those who were asking some questions last meeting. Commissioner Hensley, you have a question.
Yeah, I'm wondering, the slide we're currently looking at, are these the 2 options before us? Because it seemed to me we had more than 2 options before.
There were there were 3 options for refinancing. The right-hand slide is basically the same, regardless of whether you take the taxable option or the non-taxable option. So I just consolidated it into one. Really, the crux of this is if you want to take cash out up front and make it a taxable bond to the bond purchasers, you are required to spend 85% of that within the first 3 years. So you would be committing to the fact that you're going to do more projects and have to spend that money. Whereas option 2, you aren't making that commitment. We're refinancing the current debt, and we will have cash along the way to do projects if you choose to move forward in that manner. So one kind of locks you in now, and the other one gives you more flexibility.
And Julie, you mentioned that Jerry says he can do it, but it would be a lot of work, and so we'd be overworking him and his staff. And also, it would be a huge, not a detriment, but it would definitely affect our downtown businesses if we did the option on the left. Correct?
On the right.
On the right. I'm sorry, the one where we have to spend it in the first 3 years. Yes. Okay.
Sorry, maybe that is your left.
Oh, it's my right. It's the right. You were right.
And either way, it gets paid off in the same number of years.
It does.
It does.
Well, I'm certainly not a fan of overworking staff and affecting businesses. So I would say proceed with the one that is more that can be handled much more easily. So I think I'd go with the one on the left.
Got a consensus?
I agree. Staff recommendation seems the best move.
I would agree with the staff's recommendation on number 2.
I would as well.
So it sounds fairly consensus to me. Everybody agrees.
Okay.
So yeah.
The next step to this process is I'll bring a resolution forward to the Urban Renewal Agency to do the refinance, and we will need to do a resolution or an IGA with the city because the urban renewal is a component of the city and the debt is taken out under the credit of the city. So there's an IGA that has to be done between the 2 agencies as well. But our bond attorney prepares all of that, and I'll bring that forward at the next meeting for you.
Great. And Julie, I don't know if we have to do this in a meeting, but as far as the breakdown of that $475,000, if you're able to just send that to all of us in an email, I think that would be sufficient, unless other people want to have discussions regarding it. Vice Chair Hodson?
Is that something that can be brought to the budget meeting when we do the urban renewal conversation? I think that the urban renewal budget committee would benefit from seeing that as well and understanding and education piece around that as well.
That's a wonderful idea. Yeah.
Okay, I'll bring it to that meeting for the urban renewal budget.
Great, thank you. Any other questions of Julie? All right, Scott, you had mentioned that Joe might have something to say as well.
Yes, and thank you for your discussion and direction on that, by the way. So the other part of this is just informational again, but since the last time you met and discussed this, there were some questions that were asked of me, not necessarily in the meeting, but from some of the Urban Renewal Agency commissioners, some of you sort of, and this is something I've heard more than a few times, over my time with the city, as well as the idea or the option of considering expanding the urban renewal district to take in other potential projects. For example, the industrial park extension, the Walnut extension. Could we do a simple boundary adjustment of the Urban Renewal Agency? What would it take to pull in a project like that? So I was going to ask Joe to give you a little quick synopsis of what that would look like. It is possible, but there is some challenge to doing that, or there's some work involved, of course, but it is doable. However, in that particular project, I do want to remind you as the commission, but also you'd have to kind of go back to when you're wearing your city council hats. When we've discussed some of our street projects and our CIP planning in the last few months, we've been talking about that in some different meetings. I do want to remind you, the Industrial Park Extension Road to 99, we do have fully funded in our CIP with street funding. So it's possible that we can do some boundary adjustments. There's some challenge to that. But the reality is we don't really need to do that to fund that project. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that. But I would like to ask Joe just to give you a quick run through of what that looks like, should you ever want to consider that.
Hello, I think some of you have heard this explanation somewhat before in different conversations. Those of you who were on the agency when we purchased the Patty Green property might remember that there was talk of this 1% rule. And that was 3 acres out of the 300. And so it came in under the 1% rule, where we could add not more than 1% to the urban renewal area without actually triggering having to go back to the same process that we created the original plan. And that's actually just in the statute. It's 457, whereas 457-085. But it explicitly does say that if you add more than 1%, you basically do what is construed as a substantial change, and therefore you have to proceed as if and go back and proceed in the same manner as you did in the original plan, which is all of the public hearings. It's like making sure and getting a testimony from the other taxing districts that are affected, and coming up with all sorts of findings and basically researching and describing not only the areas, but the impacts and the relationship between those things and the overall plan. So it is substantially more onerous if you get past that 1%, which we have already come right up on that 1% by purchasing the Patty Green property. It is still doable. And then there's this idea of, if we went through that whole process, right, maybe you would be able to then do some other plans that aren't in our original plan, or other items that aren't in our original plan. So it's not to say that there isn't room for more discussion about that. This came about, I think, out of the discussion of all of the stuff that Julie was showing originally in some of her options. And I think some of you were asking, why isn't the Walnut Street in its entirety on that? And can we not just amend it to add it? The good news is that as it currently sits, the Patty Green property, that first bit is actually in the urban renewal. So that could still have urban renewal funds as to that piece of property. So you can start the road with using those funds. And there's going to be a big roundabout, I think, there, and it might actually be an expensive chunk. So that's something to keep on your frontal lobes for when we discuss these items at the following workshop that the councilor or Commissioner Parker in this instance brought forward as a future idea. But otherwise, yeah, it would take a lot more going back to the original plan and a lot more meetings and public hearings in order to put the whole darn thing in there. And as Scott had just mentioned, the capital improvement plan using the roads funds and maybe even some of these CARES dollars that Commissioner Spoon brought up might just do the trick anyway, because they've budgeted, I think it's $6 or so million already towards Walnut Street. So it looks like that's being somewhat taken care of. So those are all the thoughts I have. on this matter for this workshop, unless you have questions for me.
Commissioner Parker.
Thanks, Sean. Well, as the guy who got this thing started, let me just say, no, I don't want to go through the entire process of reopening this. My question was, is there, how much is left of our 1% to be able to expand? And the reason is this, that if we have access to other funding, it gives us more flexibility, that it gives us a chance to balance things in terms of if we do have more funds in the urban renewal district to spend than we do in the road fund, it frees up the road fund to do those type of road projects. So I don't want to do the big deal. I'm just saying, how much more of the rubber band can we pull out?
Okay.
Saying that we've used most of 1% sounds like not much. A couple yards, a half an acre, that's what I was trying to figure out. That it just gives us more flexibility having access to more funds. That's all.
Okay, and I will gladly do the math on that, because the original size of the acreage and then divide the paddy grain property into it, and we'll know exactly what that number is.
Great, thanks, Joe. Any other questions for Joe? All right.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
I'll talk to you guys soon.
All right. And Scott to finish up here.
I think we've that's all we've got for you tonight on that subject. Unless you had any other follow-up questions, that was shorter and easier than we had thought it might be. So thank you again. You do have an executive session as the Urban Renewal Agency immediately following, just to remind you. And that's all the business that we had for you tonight.
We cannot start that before 7 p.m. though, correct?
That's correct. We anticipate a longer discussion. So
you never know with this group, right?
Correct.
So we might talk all night and we might get done quick. So great. Well, then until then, we'll adjourn into our executive session starting at 7:00 p.m. Can I get a motion to adjourn into the exec session?
So moved. Second.
All right. So moved by Vice Chair Hodson and seconded by Commissioner Hensley to adjourn into executive session beginning right at 7:00. So we'll see you guys in 30 minutes. And there is a different link for that meeting, just so you all remember.